Today I want to talk about making your own paper or homemade paper. Uh, and as you know, if you've been following my recent show at the Carmel Art Association in the Center Gallery was the tribute to 300-pound paper and other human beings. But that's a very, very European, traditional European paper, the 300-pound paper, which is made in a process that takes 3 days to make. The difference between European papers, Japanese papers, which came very popular in the 60s and 70s, and in the 80s, people started some artists started making their own paper, following the traditions of various tribal groups. The tribal groups that I'm going to be talking about today, the tribal group will be the people in Mexico that make the amate paper. The amate paper was the paper of the indigenous people of central Mexico. And when you are in Mexico and you see these brightly colored, now more commercial paintings on amate paper, then you realize how much amate paper they're making now for obvious financial reasons, as well as it's a beautiful paper. So let's look at these different homemade papers that take on the feeling of the amate. Mate is a brownish, more brown than this, but we're looking at one side of this is coated, and the other side may not be coated, but it's the same principle. And what you're making it out of is it's a bark. It's a bark-based paper. This paper is bark-based and has rag in it. It's a combination. So it's not 100% cotton like the traditional high-end European papers would have to be 100% cotton. My 300-pound paper is 100% cotton. Okay, so when I'm making a drawing like this, which is related to these drawings here, these smaller ones, which is done on traditional hot press watercolor paper, which means hot press means that they're smooth. That's very different than the process that's made for these, and these are made more. These are in the mold-made tradition, so each one is made in the mold, but with a combination of bark and cotton and rags. Essentially a lot of homemade papers made out of rags. So let's take a look at this side of it, where we get this where it's been treated with a surface that is more acceptable to my India. This is India ink, and this is watercolor, and getting that tonality that I have in here works with this paper very well. When I had this paper like this, you'd think it was on both sides. But some homemade papers have two sides to them. And you see that, which I've used, and we'll see it later when I... Okay, so think of this being in the mold, and you're pressing it down on the screen. And so no two papers are alike, like the 300-pound paper, except that this paper is much thinner and may not be as permanent. So let's look again. We're here, and then it's this. And I've used my Indie ink on some of them where it fits, more on this side of the paper. This is the paper before it's sized. And this is the sized size. So the sizing is very important to paper making if you're using watercolors or water base paint, because one of the things that it does is it gives you a not as absorbent surface, less absorbent surface. So let's look at these in terms of, here I'm playing the Indie ink, very black, and making the gray, the blue-gray on, again, the size side, because I wouldn't be able to get this blacky black, this very deep black on the paper if it wasn't sized. Okay, it would soak into the paper more, and we lose it when to get this graphic, very graphic feeling in this one. Has to have that surface that gets black, like what's down here in the shoulders. Turn around, and there it is. But you also get pieces of things in here that you'll see, little pieces of fiber. And it's, again, this combination of bark and cotton. Now, what I got fascinated with, and this is the only one I did it with, was using some what we call traditional Mexican folkloric colors, and some black line. So again, but this surface could be lighter, it could be less, more absorbent in areas and less absorbent in others, and you get these colors which are fluorescent in a sense, iridescent, and then I have an iridescent clear pigment that goes around it that this technically is made to glow in the dark. I put the color on very thin to let some of the bark color show through. I put it on sometimes thick with the black when I'm drawing it out, and this is drawn out in the black first. When I want to emphasize something, in this particular tradition, I use the black in some areas. When I want a texture that, and these are done for mostly for just to see what effect happens on top of the paper. So when I'm here, I have an afro, and I wanted to get this afro happening, and the feeling of the afro hair has to be there. That texture has to be there. It cannot be absorbed. It has to sit on top, and behind it is a thinner. So this is the Indie ink, build up in many layers to get the afro on the paper. And look at this paper. This paper is very different. It has some of the sizing over here, and then it goes. This particular one is darker and more like an earthy gray. So look through there, you'll see pieces of things. Look at the edge. So that edge is the color of the sizing, not the color of the paper. As I did that, I started to think of more building up of the black and more and more layers until I get up with this beard down here and this lighter, more like the afro up here. But here, it literally shines my finger. Because this paper gets lighter and darker, I had a wonderful area that I could leave for the nose, the light on the nose, making a more of an effect that I could use to take the viewer into the head. So down here I have the shadows, but if I put the shadows up here, we lose the effect of this black. And up here, I take some of the warmish red that's like what's in the paper, and I put it a little bit in the hair here. But once again, we're talking about these papers are homemade, and they're homemade in a mold process that requires it to air dry. If I heat dry this in this process, the paper will lose its natural look. And that's part of the beauty of these papers, is a very natural look, not an even mechanical look. Let's take this paper and I draw with the big ink stick and my India ink felt tip and get that, because this paper, and I use some pencil marks that I see I left in here, but you begin to see that again, the side with the coating, that's, and I don't have to have the black very often here, but more like a graphic drawing part, not as a shape into itself, but part of the bigger shape. Look in here, when we see things like this happening, it's just what happened in the mold. Now let's look on the other side. There's your piece of wood. This must be a color from a rag, because it's not paint. When I used this, the sizing is never even. Now sizing is even in the traditional European process at one time, but there's three layers that are woven together in a sense of evenness, and it looks even at first look. These are not even at all. So you're not, even when you're putting some sizing on it, you're getting these areas that look like like there was maybe water was here or something. Something in the mold made this happen. So when the sizing went on it, it may became more earthy pink, and in the paper, but we weren't there when the paper was made, so we don't know. But this linear is from the India ink felt tips, and occasionally using the big black kink, the kink ink stick felt tip. The blackest blacks only in smaller areas and more linear. In here, the black is blacker than the black here, and this is from the watercolor, kind of putting a shadow on the piece, but working with the surface that has the coating on it.
How old are these papers?
The papers are about 40 or 50 years old. Somewhere between there, I don't know exactly. But so in here, I'm playing with a lot of different textures, a lot of different lines, and this paper accepts it beautifully. Or I think it accepts it beautifully. And because this is a multiple aspect piece, I like it to have a variety of textures in different sections. The multiple aspect being, if I have a head going forward and then I have a head in profile and I put the two together, I get a multiple aspect. Let's look at the back of this paper. And that's the paper as it comes out of the mold. And everything that's in the mold shows up in the paper.
And is that a deckled edge?
This is a deckled edge because anything that's mold made will have a deckled edge. And no two edges are going to be the same. Even if it's the European made by Reeves or Fabriano or whatever, if it's made in the traditional mold, one sheet at a time. Again, one sheet at a time is making these differences possible. They're not on a roll being cut with the machine. You go all up into here, there's the shadows and things that are happening, and then there's a little darker things here, because it's not necessarily, the sizing is not necessarily accepting to the paper all the same way. We don't know where it's going to go. It's an adventure when you're making this kind of paper. But to understand that if you're coming from a point of that no two papers are alike, this tells you that story. So again, we'll go look at the back of this and see in this case lots of little threads and things and pieces of wood and chips. There's some wood chips and it's all in there. Okay, this one is very different in the sense of what I used it, because the paper was different. The paper was very spotted and had a sense of a sense of the mold was something was going on. But what was ever going on, whatever was used, whatever rags and whatever else was thrown in here to get that tone. I wanted to use the other side where the was lighter, but it had that, so something was happening in the mold causing this, and something was happening. Some green it was in the mold somewhere, and was causing those green stains up there. In this case, I'm using the Kink ink stick, the fat felt tip, and my fat felt tip, and my India ink felt tips, and my smaller, more linear felt tips in the eyes and in certain areas. But the important thing is it's staying on top. I don't lose this texture. I don't lose these little lines that are here and here. And this gray can stay in one swatch. This one we see things where the mold goes way off on the side. So these would all these papers, if you're framing them, they have to be mounted because you don't want an evenness to be for these otherwise you're wasting this beautiful decal. And whatever happened here looks like it came out of the mold more, is something that we have to just accept these happy accidents. This one where I was starting to use more linear things with the big Kink ink stick felt tip, the giant felt tip, was to get the black, and I was drawing the lines with my Faber-Castell India ink felt tips. Each one of these images have to have a different texture to them. So I like the paper. No two images are alike. And like I always say, no two human beings are alike. So this has a lot of light areas in the sizing, so something was causing the sizing to block out. Something the sizing didn't go even at all, which I like that it didn't go even. Again, we turn it around, and there's the natural by itself out of the mold.
So is one side usable, or is either side usable?
I can use both of them, and you'll see the next piece coming up is this side of the paper. Okay, this side didn't work for me. I started it, but I didn't like where it was going. So I turned over to the back side, the more natural side, the side that is as it comes out of the mold first. And as I get more and more linear as this process went on. And we start seeing drips and things that may have been the person putting on the sizing. But look at how this paper goes. It's wonderful. It's not even. So when I had it on this side, I I was playing with these lines here, the starting off, and then I would have built this up. As I'm looking at it, I probably could have taken this much further and got something else out of it, but I just where I was at the time, I just said no, I'm going to turn it over. So this is an unfinished piece in terms of. Okay, this next one was very different, and I used it in a very different way because it had a big light, almost totally white spot in the middle of the sizing side, and I played with this idea of the of seeing through a blinder, and then making the lines on the side and playing, because I was playing with lines is really what I was talking about, and this white, making sure this white showed up. That's the white is on the surface of the paper. Now that's very white, and that happens again in the next piece that we'll look at. Only it's the whole paper. Now let's look at the back side, and there's the brown, showing where the sizing, the pinkish sizing is on there and on the edge here. So it was coming over the edge of the mold. And for some reason, whatever, this was much lighter here. The last piece here is very light on this side. And only a slight sizing on it on the other side. So this is the natural side, and this is a slight sizing on it. But something coming in here looks like kind of like foxing, but it's not. It's just something from the mold. Here I'm playing with different textures, and then the watercolor going over the textures. Because this is a naturally rough surface, I wanted to, and this particular piece of paper is very rough. So what I wanted is to have the loose edges of the watercolor showing the roughness of it. There's a paper that's made in India that is called Indian Village paper when you go to art supply stores and things. And the Indian Village paper is made in a more natural, uneven setting. And these also take on the quality of when they're like this lightness of the Indian Village paper, which is usually a little wider than this. So if you look for Indian Village paper, you can get paper that's close to this in feeling. All these drawings and paintings and on these homemade sheets of paper celebrate the natural, the organic, accepting what happens in the process of making them. And that's real important, is accepting what happens in the process of making them. And also accepting what happens when I'm drawing. Except for that one piece, for some reason, I just got it in my head that I couldn't do it. Anyway, I celebrate the natural.